where do we begin? We were asked to talk about resilient digital workforce, and we don't quite know where that starts. It's a matter of, we've been talking about it a lot. We want to have a resilient supply chain. We want to have a digital supply chain. Where do we start? And we're not going to try to cover all of that ground in the next 45 minutes. I know we're behind schedule and we need to eat, right? that's what we're doing here. So I'll take my seat in the middle so I can see everyone. And I'm going to introduce some of our panelists, although you've already met Stephanie. She is, once again, the Associate Vice President for IDC Manufacturing and Energy Insights for IDC Asia Pacific. Hello again, Stephanie. I'd like to call on stage my second panelist, Mr. Cliff Eala. He is the founder and president of BS Works. And since we are all adults in this room, I will read in full the book he's written called Shitty Places and Selfish People. Hi, Cliff. My third panelist is Stevenson Tan. He is the Environment, Health, and Safety Leader for Asia Pacific of Corteva AgriScience. He has experience in software development, in IT development, and in facilities management. Hello, Steven. Thank you for joining us. And finally, last but not the least, David Kukingnan. He is a director for regional supply planning of SC Johnson and has also previously worked for P&G doing planning and logistics. So hello, everyone. I have a big wad of notes here. I think the microphones are ready. I'd like to begin with David, I mean. Let's define what the heck is a resilient digital workforce? What makes a resilient digital workforce? And what is like the best examples that you've seen perhaps of a resilient digital workforce? Steph?
Well, I think one of the things to note is a resilient digital workforce is a workforce that allows us to have the digital capability to provide data, insights, and deliver on three key things that allow for a resilient supply chain. Right? So the first one is around visibility. We need to be able to support actions of visibility, which means being, and I'm going to quote Scott here, who's going to be speaking later, who said this at a conference once, and I'll never forget it. If you don't know data, you have no position in my supply chain organization, right? Because I think that is a key part in being able to have that visibility. Being able to understand it, so being able to derive some sort of intelligence from the data that you have, and then being able to act on it and have agility is really important so that you're able to provide the flexible solutions that our customers want. Now, that's not an easy thing. IDC's talent survey last year actually found out that 55% of Asia Pacific respondents indicated for supply chain capabilities they're experiencing talent issues due to both lack of resources, so can't find the people, or the people they have don't have those skills. So, COVID-19 has probably accelerated some of these issues with the lack of labour mobility that we've had, moving between provinces or moving between countries. I think that's been a big issue. But from a skills perspective, I think starting with data and being able to ensure that you're able to do something with the data and then act on it is going to be really key.
Right. I think it's interesting to talk about there's a labor shortage, although what we've seen here in the Philippines is that they're more dispersed to outside of the provinces. Did work from home not solve that problem? Like you can say that a digital workforce is one where you can work anywhere. Some might say that, but how would that be a burden, a hurdle, so to speak?
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with the connectivity that's available, and it comes back to the resiliency is not just the responsibility of the company, right? It's the responsibility of the worker in that we have to be willing to build up those skills in ourselves. But it's also the responsibility of the ecosystem around that in providing the structure that's necessary in order to facilitate things like remote work. So I know Philippines, I think 7,600 islands.
Yeah, 7,600 something.
Indonesia has a similar problem, but
right.
having the infrastructure necessary to reach all those islands it could be a challenge. Power, those sort of capabilities are definitely necessary. So there's an ecosystem that's required in order to facilitate that. The individual at the company level having the policies to support it, and also at the broader ecosystem level, whether it be through business parks, certain estates that you might have, or through government, the infrastructure necessary to make that happen.
Thanks, Steph. David, you've been doing this for years and you're leading a supply chain operation, not just in the Philippines, but across the region. What examples can you cite, like, of this resilient digital workforce that you've observed? Maybe there's something in SE Johnson that you've observed.
Um, Resiliency in material science is defined by the ability of a material to get back to its normal state after getting hit by force, right?
Yeah.
So when we talk about a resilient digital workforce in support of supply chain, we talk about, in line with what Stephanie mentioned, what are the skill sets needed to be able to, to be on top of the data and to translate that data into actionable insight, right? At the start of the pandemic, the needs were very well defined at the start of the pandemic. It was quite top line. How do I get visibility on my end-to-end supply chain, right? How much inventory do I have in the warehouse? What does the customer need? How do I serve that order? As the needs evolved, then the requirement on a resilient digital workforce, the skill sets required started to shift, right?
Right.
Instead of just knowing what's in the supply chain, it became predictive. What is the next node of my supply chain that might fail? And how do I begin to address that? At the start of the lockdown, it was just China. Later on in the pandemic, we saw it trickling over.
Right.
And then we started to get lead indicators that ports in China are getting full. And now ports in the US will not be able to send shipments on time. So
Right.
being able to react to that, even 2 weeks ahead, we were able to get products into some of the markets at a much faster rate. So that predictive analytics piece, understanding the nature of your supply chain so that you can understand which node might be at risk in the future. A little bit on
It would be
that.
interesting though, because we have varying degrees of tech literacy. So you have, like, suppose the people who work in high-level positions, in office positions, who can handle it. But what about those in the front lines? What we all in the Philippines call logistics frontliners. Like, we can have, like, some degree of tech literacy from those handling office tasks, but those doing the actual work on the field, the actual movement of goods, how do you translate that?
It's two parts. At the operations level, managing a warehouse, there's a little bit on how do we make their work simplified. That choicefulness component. Like when we're talking in the Philippines market, when SM requires you to deliver a set of trucks by this date, are we equipping, if we have limited resources, are we equipping our operators to perform in the way that gives them the best output? Are we able to operate structure the warehouse in such a way that the movement becomes more efficient, right? So then with a limited set of workforce, you get the best output and serve that order. So that's one part. The second part, I think, is also upskilling the workers. We talked about generative AI changing the type of work that people do.
Right.
I have a specific example where we do case picking in the warehouse. Like, you have an order, you need to case pick to fill a pallet, fill a truck. In the past, it was a very manual method where you have a list. You literally walk the warehouse floor, right, to get the products. Then we introduced voice technology. You have an earpiece which tells you go to this lane,
Voice picking.
right? Voice picking.
Yep.
So you begin to change the way you work and how you interact with data to become more efficient. And even the manual type of work needs to evolve, right, with this type of technology so that the productivity improves and we're able to do more with less.
Yes, Steph.
Yeah, and if we could add that, I mean, we're going, voice picking is kind of the first generation, now we're going to augmented reality becoming introduced. So you can even address things like digital skills does not mean that everybody has to become a computer scientist. It's being able to interpret data. So when we're simplifying the environment, it might be things like, all right, the environment will flash green when they're putting it away in the right location and red when it's in the wrong location. So being able to put very simple cues to your point about simplifying the environment. You know, color coding aisles so that they say go to the red aisle. Again, you know, addressing things like illiteracy, which can be more inherent in you know, the frontline jobs.
Right.
You know, and again, simplifying that. I think that's a really important thing to consider.
Right, thank you, Steph. David. It's nice that David mentioned voice speaking. I'm pretty sure some of the people in this audience have done voice speaking, right? Right. Pointing at certain people over there. So I'm going to go to Stephen and Cliff because we know that these technologies are not new. Voice speaking has been around for almost over a decade now, I assume. But I think there's still a hesitation for some companies to really go a little more all-in on technology. Of course, the past 3 years, we've seen that more companies really go all-in on that. So I suppose the question is, what is the challenge here, do you think, really on the cost? Or is it just the challenge of letting the people come in? And let's start with Stephen first, because you would have that experience.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a question of cost, adoption, whether people are willing to take it up, it's usually both. You're trying to find a sweet spot where both things intersect at some point, where the cost of emerging technology gradually comes down and people's willingness gradually come up. And as was mentioned earlier, what catalyzes this also are crises, right? The necessity is the mother of invention, just as a crisis is the catalyst for adoption, right? A lot of these emergent technologies are not new. They've been around for a while. But in the beginning, not a lot of people were using them, but suddenly an occasion comes up, a major catastrophe, a change in the business climate, the industry sector is transforming, then you adopt in order to survive. So very often, as humans, we need to be pushed to get there. Secondly is the cost of operation. Businesses are constantly trying to optimize their costs, right? In order to be competitive, in order to continue to provide their profit motive or mission with their stakeholders. So that's also something that's why companies who are very much in the front line need to keep a very close eye on how technologies are maturing, and as well as what the market is demanding as well in terms of ability to deliver time to market, delivery of service. So these are the things.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but what should, like, if I'm an executive at the company looking to start my process, what should I consider? What should I consider if I'm going to, like, if you're going to tell them, consider this above all? What should that thing be?
Tell who? Which stakeholder? Are you talking about the business leaders of that company, or are we talking about our customers who are
That's
consuming?
fair. So there's really different
there's
approaches.
different views,
okay,
right?
But I'm the guy that pulls the money strings. Like, if I'm the guy that's saying, like, my goal is to have better customer service.
Yeah. So if you're talking to a business owner, right, your business board of directors, for example, or the people who manage the company's budget, usually the number one is this economically viable, right? What's the ROI? What's the return on investment? That's the one thing.
Right.
But sometimes some bigger issues can supersede that. It could be, but we have a very important mission to be sustainable, to be green, to have a certain community service responsibility. So in those cases, we may say, okay, cost may not be the only consideration. Our other social responsibility takes precedence. So we're going to switch, maybe our truck fleet to biodiesel instead, or to natural gas, or to some cleaner technology. Or in another case as well, it's a matter of survival. Like when suddenly something like a COVID suddenly comes up, and you have to adopt more expensive technologies just so you can keep operating.
Right.
Like automation.
So that's, I think, so you're saying here is that it's really dependent on what the company values before you can easily identify which technology.
Yeah, it's a calculus type of a formula rather than a black on and off switch.
Cliff,
Yeah.
does that make it easier for like, if executives will see one thing, but of course the people below, the managers, the rank and file, the frontliners, they'll probably see things differently. So how do you sell that to them? How do you make them a resilient digital workforce?
Okay. Can I go to the resilient
Go.
digital workforce?
Go
first?
ahead.
I'd just like to establish two things. When we talk resilient digital workforce, what do we mean? From a practical point of view, if you say digital, what does it exactly look like in the field, right? Yes, it has to do with data. It has to do with working with computers. But more specifically, I'm referring to the essential skills, digital skills framework that the UK government released. They talk about, when they talk about digital skills, they talk about communication, information handling, problem solving, security, and transacting. So these are general categorizations. So when you say communication, does the person know how to use email? Does he know how to archive his email? Does he know how to classify? Does he know how to create rules of when to handle or how to handle spam? If you talk about transacting, does he know how to open an account for an online banking transaction? Does he know how to buy on Shopee or Lazada or Amazon? Because if the person doesn't have these basic skills, he cannot think forward about, oh, let's digitize our ordering process from our customers or our stores, right? So that's fundamental. That's a fundamental level of digital skills. And the same thing with security. Can the person protect himself from phishing? Does he know that he should look at the domain name when he gets an email? So these are basic digital skills. And on top of those, you build these other more case-specific skills. So that's digital. The resilience part, material science, the ability to get back to its original state. So resilience is the personal ability to deal with, recover, and grow from adversity. If you have no adversity, there is no resilience needed. Okay, so we have to be clear about that. And this is where there's a balance, where you have to strike a balance between cost efficiency, automation, and flexibility. Because once you automate certain processes, you build in, you achieve certain cost efficiencies, but you build in certain rigidities. So you need to balance that for a resilient supply chain. So from a perspective of the workforce, there's certain attributes of people that have to be built so that the person becomes resilient. I won't go through all of them, but I just like to emphasize flexibility and optimism. Flexibility is in an organizational setting is the ability to approach a problem from different perspectives. This is especially when you have what I call an out-of-process event. An out-of-process event is an event that happens in the supply chain for which there is no process in place. So for example, if you're fast logistics, you deliver for Unilever, you did not expect that the main bridge where 30 trucks pass from your warehouse to the stores just collapsed. What does a resilient person look like on the ground? A resilient person, a non-resilient person would say, oh, the bridge collapsed. We can't deliver. It's not my problem. And the person withdraws from the situation. What does a resilient person look like? The resilient person approaches the problem. Oh, the bridge collapsed. Is there another way to address this? So that's a difference. The resilience here is manifested in the approach attitude and the avoidance attitude. And you see that in your people. Who withdraws and who approaches the problem? The other aspect is the optimism part. So I'm not talking about like everything is all good, etc. But I'm talking about the ability to explain to yourself that you have the capability to change a future state.
Okay.
Because when something breaks, if I say I have no ability to change the future, then I'll withdraw. But if I actually tell myself I have the ability to change, then I can recover. Then I grow from the adversity. So those are the characteristics, I would say, of a resilient digital workforce.
That's fascinating because we talk about digitalization as if it's very cold and mechanical, but what you're saying, and I think what we're going to get into at this point is, you know, you still need the human touch when you're going with when you're going all in on digital. That seems like something that we risk forgetting in the pursuit of being shiny and gizmo-y and all that.
Yes, yes, definitely. You were mentioning earlier, in relation to what Stevenson was saying, what else does how do we pitch this so that...
Right.
How do we pitch this?
Them in? Yeah.
The challenge in a situation like that is, yes, we need to ask for ROI. We need to ask for payback. When does the return come back? Note that's a very transactional way of looking at it. If you are going to invest in SAP, for instance, and you approach this on a very transactional ROI payback approach, you'll never do it. No matter what kind of time and motion studies you do, you cannot justify the ridiculously exorbitant price of SAP. I hope nobody from SAP is here.
I don't think anyone is. Check the list.
But if you believe that you don't have the time and motion studies, you don't have the evidence for that. The CFO can't produce it. But if you believe by putting in SAP in place, there are many other opportunities that will open up. Customer satisfaction will improve. Efficiency in the warehouse will improve. The accuracy of my reports from my financial data is going to be there. There's a component of belief there. You don't have hard evidence for that. But if you believe it, then you'll say go. So these are things that you need to be able to explain it, to frame it in a way that senior management understands. It always cannot just be ROI or payback.
Henrik, could I just add to that?
Yeah, go.
I'd like to go back to a point that you mentioned about adversity being that catalyst for it. I think for a lot of people on the front line, the adversity is the change, right? We put something in front of them and they're resistant to that change. And I think one of the things that we can do to combat that is to make the technology more familiar. So doing things like, and there was an organization that I worked with in Singapore, they put their experiments, like all the technologies that they were experimenting, they put it in the middle of the warehouse. They set an area up in the warehouse so that people, as they do their jobs, they can see the technology in action. They can see the different pilots. They were encouraged to visit it at lunch. You might have technology champions from the ground that were interested, and so, you know, HR promoted this as a way to expand their skill sets, looking for volunteers through peers, right, rather than this being a top-down thing. So this was one way to reduce some of the resistance to that change, which is actually, from an IDC perspective, we actually find lack of management vision around change, the commercial, not just the commercial fortitude, the willingness to take a workforce through that change, and then the fear aspect. So workers themselves not willing to engage with the technologies is often a big aspect of it. So removing that fear from it. And then I think to address your second point, Cliff, when we're looking at the ROI calculation, it's not just about this is going to be something that reduces manpower, right? Or it's going to reduce a cost in a certain area. We also need to look at the top line aspects that you mentioned, right? It's going to increase customer service, which is going to improve our CSAT scores, or it's going to improve feedback. We might have improved quality around picking, which is going to reduce the returns. Being able to start to articulate those sort of values as a plus. You know, if improved quality, then you can start to charge more. So you're actually protecting your price position. You know, you get less price erosion. Being able to have higher throughput. These are all things that you can actually add to your ROI calculation. And then looking for that technology is not just going to help the warehouse, it's also going to help accounts with their collections. So looking at ROI from different use cases, different angles. So you're not just focusing on, all right, we're putting in a picking system that's going to improve the warehouse. But if accuracy improves in the warehouse, you actually improve cash flow because accounts can now collect money more effectively. So there's a few different things here. We need to think about how we're managing the change to reduce the resistance, being able to make technology more familiar, and then from an ROI perspective, looking at top line as well as the bottom line.
It's a good point about making technology familiar, because I remember when we talked earlier, you were talking earlier in the week about like how you introduce a technology to your team, which they resisted early on and then they did it again. Like, can you share that to us,
Right.
David?
There's a piece that I wanted to touch on with what Stephanie mentioned.
Yeah.
There's a piece about upskilling that is, how do you say? There's a quote which is, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Have you heard about that? Right? So when we talk about digital tools, regenerative AI, programming, Python, macro, all of these are tools. They're meant to help us do something, solve a problem. Right? In the past, the approach we've had in P&G, this was back in my time in Singapore, was we have citizen developers. These are people who are more your tech-savvy type of individuals who want to learn how to do robotics programming with Blue Prism, learning Python, all of these things.
Right.
Because now, as you equip them with these different types of skill sets, they can now look at other ways to solve a problem instead of just throwing Excel formulas to it. And having that,
Right.
having these people serve as your, I don't know, spokesperson, advocacy drivers, right? They're your champions, your digital champions. They can help turn that tide in terms of adoption. There was a point, to answer your question, Henrik,
Yeah.
there was a point that Cliff mentioned about the value proposition. I think that this was also back when we were talking.
Yeah.
And having a value proposition as we talk about transformation, including digital transformation, is important. Because that helps change the buy-in of the people. Because to make that change, it's a risk that people are taking, right? Doing something different is scary. But when that trade-off becomes meaningful to them, then that's when they make the jump. The example that Henrik was mentioning, I was in charge of planning here in Laguna. Back in 2010, we wanted to move from Excel to SAP planning. That didn't go well. 6 years later, I was in Singapore. I was in charge of that team again. At this new time, 6 years later, Kabuyao plant in Laguna is now producing detergent for Philippines, Thailand, and whatever else country in Asia. Now planning cannot be done just in Excel because there's so much more variables to consider. And that made the pain point more relevant to make that transition to SAP. So that value proposition for the individual is important to encourage people to make that jump.
Suppose the interesting question now is, we are currently approaching embracing digitalization, building a resilient workforce as a response to a problem. We talked about, we went digital because the pandemic forced us to. So how do we go from that attitude to, let's do it because that's what's going to happen in the future? How do we make shift from reacting to current problems to being proactive when it comes to what future might happen? Because as David was talking about, they were learning Python, all of these programming languages, all of these technologies, and then they will have a solution when the problem arrives that they don't know yet. How do we get there? Cliff, Steven.
Yeah. So yeah, well, there are several ways to get there. One is incremental, where you've got a leadership that envisions what are the emerging trends, what are the emerging changes to the industry, to your business. Like us in the agriculture sector, right? We have started to see the trend of farmers getting older, lesser and lesser people wanting to farm. So you need to invest in automation, in machineries, in higher technologies like better seeds, R&D, and even digitalization of agriculture, which has been very far behind compared to many other industries, and yet it is the oldest industry in the world.
Right.
So that's one area, continuous. But there's another area as well, which is sort of a leap in change, in digitalization, or in adoption of technology. And crisis management planning is important in this. Every company should do it. You know, you have to study scenarios where what happens if a particular modality of logistics fail. Like piracy maybe in the South China Sea, or there's a war that erupts somewhere in this part of the world, the Suez Canal, for example.
Right.
Or a major earthquake, like the Tohoku earthquake in 2011. How do we respond to a crisis like that? Having a plan in place to address an emergency puts you in a better position to respond quickly and in the right way, and have the resources to engage or solve those problems as they come.
I have a good question on the back behind me, which I wanted to throw to Cliff. And you think we know the answer to this. Why build a resilient digital workforce rather than just getting digitally capable people? Although my first thought to that question is, aren't we all digitally capable now? Why is that not enough?
Well, strictly speaking, the answer to the question is because if you hire just digitally people, they may not be resilient.
That's true.
Yeah, but you hire people not only because they're digitally capable, right? And that's correct. If you can hire people that are digitally capable, you'll have a preference for them. But there are other competencies that you want in people aside from just being digitally capable.
So I'm thinking of the move from Industry 4.0, because Industry 4.0 is all about operational efficiency. And there's a shift towards Industry 5.0, which is all about still using technology but with the human touch. So it's how do you balance that? Because they're now thinking maybe we went too much on the adopting technology for just efficiency's sake, and now we're leaving the humans behind. How do we, so I think a part of that is about making sure that for example, I may be digitally capable, but am I open to adopting new technologies? Am I open to working with this new technology? How can we start that process, Cliff?
I think the idea that change is constant is something that we already know. You either future-proof yourself or you will be rendered obsolete, whether that's at the organizational level or the individual level. That's a given. If you don't accept that, then you'll just find yourself one day out of a job or at the organizational level out of customers. Now, and I go back to, again, we spoke about change. Stephanie mentioned the adversity. So I go back to the idea of flexibility and what does that look like in the meeting room, in the warehouse, in the planning room, in the loading bay, in the stores. The ability, there's this thing we call a hippo, the highest paid person's opinion.
I thought you were talking about the animal.
that kills flexibility. So you get into a meeting room, and the first person who talks is the hippo. Then why the heck did you call for the meeting? Because once the hippo gives an indication of the direction or the solution, everybody anchors on that. And all the responses are going to be anchored around that. You're killing diversity of thought. That's one. That's what it looks like when you want to foster flexibility in the organization. Another thing you might want to look at is what we call a pre-mortem. We're used to a post-mortem, right? A pre-mortem is a post-mortem done before you launch the project, or before you deploy the solution, or before you take on a customer. So everybody gathers around and say, okay, 1 year from now, we launched the project, it's 1 year from now, it failed. What could have happened? And then you start nitpicking and figuring out what are all the possibilities of problems that could have arisen that caused the problem to fail. Right? And go through. Unfortunately, on exception, we go through a post-mortem, and people rarely do a pre-mortem. Right?
I'm just going to, if you're talking about Industry 5.0 having that human interaction element, I think the thing that we've emphasized here is the digital capabilities, but it doesn't reduce the need for human skills. It probably increases the emphasis for them. So you're looking at, our surveys have showed collaboration, problem solving, the ability to generate relationships, right? These are actually skills that have become more important, not less important, as we bring in technology. There's nothing like having somebody who understands or who's able to present data but has no idea what the data is going to be used for and how it's valuable to another human being. That just destroys the ability of to extract insights from the data and to actually create value for it. Now Cliff brings up a really, you call it the pre-mortem. I'm a volunteer with the Singapore Armed Forces, and we did a training last week or 2 weeks ago where we actually talk about the BAR, the DAR, and the PAR. The before action review, the during action review, and the post action review. And it's not just used in a military context, it's used in a business context as well. Exactly what you say. So I think, having that continual review of how projects are going and how things are going to happen with the idea of having that objective in mind. Now, IDC research has actually shown that those organizations, the top 20% of organizations that have successfully digitally transformed, have aligned this with their business outcomes. So that when they do their pre-action review, their before-action review and their during-action reviews, they've got those business objectives in mind. And they bring their people along on that journey to make sure that they're achieving that. And we've actually shown with our research that organizations that successfully do that have higher profit performance and revenue performance as a result. So, it is about, it's not a simple question that we're trying to solve here. This digitally resilient worker has to have soft skills, or human skills as I like to call them. He needs to have the hard skills with regards to data and technology, but then that needs to be aligned with those factors, the individual, the corporate, the ecosystem, to be able to bring that higher performance level out to achieve the Industry 5.0 capabilities.
I suppose that's, I was also thinking that, it's really how you prize your people. Again, the question that's being flashed behind me, if I upskill my workers, will my competitors poach them from me? And my initial thought to that is, if they allow themselves to be poached, it's because they offered a better package than you.
What if you don't train them and they stay?
That's also the thought. Yes, David?
The answer is yes, but that's not an excuse not to upskill them.
Aha, yes.
Right? For two parts. One, as what Cliff mentioned, if we do not upskill now, 5 years later we will be obsolete. So
you will lose your people anyway because
Correct.
you all moved away.
Correct. Number two, you don't just upskill one, you upskill, let's say, 10. Out of those 10, 2, 3 get poached. Be happy for them, right? Encourage them to explore what's out there, but never an excuse not to upskill your talent.
I suppose one of the mindsets that we have to think about is our people are not just ours forever. Our employees will not remain ours forever. So we shouldn't act like they're horses and we're riding them on a carriage, just whipping them like that. It's just they will want to move on. They will want to move forward in their careers. Like as we young ones would put it, we have to move on at some point. But it's not because you're a bad person, it's because we found a better opportunity elsewhere. Okay, my watch tells me I have 5 minutes left, which leads, I think it's time for us to wrap it up. I'm gonna ask each of you, I think participants will always ask, okay. The participants are always gonna ask me, so what do I do? what we've learned about that it should be reactive and proactive, we should be proactive rather than reactive, we should be upskilling, we should be doing this, we should be doing that. But if there's one thing that we can do to start the process, what should it be? What's a quick win? I'm gonna start from David and we're gonna go to the side. David, start from you. That work? Okay.
2 parts on my end. The first one is, sorry, I lost my thought. 2 parts. First one is, as we look at upskilling people, have those citizen developers, have those people who are willing to be your champions on learning this new technology. That's important because you want people to advocate for change, to advocate for these new tools as and when the new problems come about. That's the first one. The second part is about, there are things that we already know people need to upskill on. We already know that as these new digital tools come about, there are benefits in terms of faster generation of data, faster, getting data all in one place and all. So there's already a level of a known skill set that we need to develop, which is data analytics and translating data into actionable insight. So that part, if it's already known, get everyone on that boat, right? Then the second part is
Give them the opportunity to explore. Even at IDC, we have a couple of floating licenses like LinkedIn Learning, right? Give them the opportunity to borrow that license for a month and have them invest in a program for themselves that's of interest to them, right? Encourage that curiosity as well, but give them the tool to do so. It doesn't necessarily have to be everybody in the company gets access. It could be something that you rotate around those that are eager. That way you do find it's a way to identify those champions as well. The other is to look at pilots. Right? What are and startups? Because they can give you small scale ideas for where things might work. All right. So pilots usually involve some sort of special pricing. You might get startups who are willing to collaborate with you and do things a little bit more cheaply. Explore, because that future gazing that I highlighted earlier and that's been brought up here is so important to work out where you're going to do this. And when you do so, make sure you align it with your business strategy.
Thanks, Steph. Cliff. That works.
Sorry, what?
What's a quick win that we can start with in our quest to build a resilient digital workforce?
Okay. We know what we want to achieve, the resilient. We spoke about what that looks like. But there's always this intention-action gap. We want to do things, but we never end up doing it. It's like our strategy. I say strategy without behavior change is a fairy tale without a happy ending, right? So we can talk about strategy, we can set our KPIs, but those things don't execute themselves. You need, from my work, you need the change in behavior. So, knowing what a resilient digital workforce looks like, you need to find out how do we change this at a behavior level. And I gave you 2 examples earlier. I mentioned the hippo. Don't let the hippo talk. He talks last, right? He talks last. And set that as a protocol for the meetings. When there are meetings to decide, the protocol is the hippo talks last. But one other, well, I mentioned the pre-mortem. One other thing I'd like to leave you with is commonly known as devil's advocate. In other situations, they call it red teaming, blue teaming, right? So when somebody comes up to a solution to the problem, usually everybody in the room agrees with the solution. The problem with that is you don't move forward. There's no diversity of thought, there's no creativity, there's no flexibility, there's no openness. You will not come up with anything new. You will not be able to solve old problems in a new way. And you cannot be resilient because resilience has to do with out-of-process events. So, formally appoint, what does it look like on the ground? Formally appoint a devil's advocate for all projects above a certain threshold or for all problems that have certain impact, business impact or operational impact beyond a certain level. What does this person do? This person's responsibility is to tear down the solution. Because if you do not formally appoint that person, everybody will anchor around the solution and you have groupthink. You don't get a new solution to the problem. I hope that helps.
Right. Steven, to close things off.
Sure. So a digital or digitalized workforce comprises of two key components, technology and also the people who use the technology. So to address that is also 2 points. To address the technology part, technology is very black and white. If it was me tomorrow, I'll ask my IT experts in the company and come in and let's look at our technology today, our infrastructure. Right? Is our network reliable? What happens if that fails? Can we go and use Starlink? Or is everybody using some old PCs and machineries? Are we allowed to use other devices? So there's very black and white solutions for a resilient IT infrastructure are already available and they're very affordable. It just requires that the company or the organization is aware of what these are and bring this on board, have a plan or roadmap to bring that on board. The second aspect on people, resilience is a behavior, is a human behavior in large part, right? We talk about adaptability, flexibility, but even more than that, it's the will to win, the will to survive, the will to change. And then where does that will come from? It comes from a higher purpose. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this business? Why do I want to keep living? Why do I want to keep working even though things are getting really hard, right? So have a clear mission statement for your people, for your organization. And secondly, resilience is not a one-man show or one-woman show. It usually takes a whole team to be truly resilient. Nobody is perfectly resilient because you have to go to sleep. You still have to take a break. Nobody's 100%. So you have to form a team that is healthy, an organization that's healthy. So engage them, build a healthy organization, do team buildings, brainstorming, listen to what the team has to say, the people in the front line, know where your biggest weaknesses are in your supply chain, in your operations, and by knowing what these problems are, then you can begin finding solutions for them. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Cliff. Thank you, Steph. Thank you, David. And my final thought is this. I was reading a book from one of our next speakers, Dr. Albert Tan, in which he said, processes are nothing without people. Let's keep that in mind. Thank you very much, and thank you to Logisim for inviting us on board. Thank you.